Beneath a garden in Nazi-occupied Warsaw lay a glass jar filled with hundreds of names. If the woman who buried it was captured, tortured, or executed, those names might become the only proof those children had ever existed. The woman was Irena Sendler. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a spy. Yet she smuggled 2,500 Jewish children out of the Warsaw Ghetto, while one of the deadliest regimes in history hunted anyone who tried to help them. Then the Gestapo caught her. What happened next transformed her from a rescuer into one of the most extraordinary and most forgotten heroes of the Second World War. To understand what Irena Sendler did, you have to understand what the Warsaw Ghetto was and what it represented in the architecture of the Nazi occupation of Poland. Following the German invasion of Poland in September 1939, the Jewish population of Warsaw, which had been one of the largest Jewish communities in the world, was subjected to a systematic process of isolation, dispossession, and ultimately destruction. In October 1940, the Germans established the Warsaw Ghetto, a walled and sealed district of the city into which more than 400,000 Jewish people were forced, an area of roughly 1 square mile that had previously housed around 160,000 people. The conditions inside the ghetto were designed not for containment, but for attrition. Food rations were set at a level calculated to produce slow starvation. Disease spread through overcrowded buildings without adequate sanitation. People died in the streets and were left there. The wall that separated the ghetto from the rest of Warsaw was not merely a physical barrier. It was a statement about who had been determined to matter and who had been determined not to. Irena Sendler was 29 years old when the ghetto was established, and she was already working as a social worker for the Warsaw Social Welfare Department. Her job gave her a credential that became the foundation of everything she would subsequently do. Social workers were permitted entry into the ghetto on the official grounds of conducting welfare inspections and controlling the spread of contagious disease. The Germans were not particularly interested in what happened to the people inside the ghetto, but they were interested in preventing disease from spreading to the German population and to the non-Jewish Polish population they were in the process of exploiting for labor. The inspection passes that Sendler and her colleagues carried represented one of the very few official channels through which the wall could be legally crossed in both directions. She understood immediately what that access meant and what it made possible. She made contact with Żegota, the Council to Aid Jews, which was the only government-sponsored organization in occupied Europe dedicated to helping Jewish people survive the Nazi occupation. Żegota operated underground, funded partly by the Polish government in exile in London and partly by the Jewish communities it was trying to assist. It was dangerous work at every level. The penalty for helping Jewish people in occupied Poland was not imprisonment. It was execution, and the execution extended not just to the person caught helping, but to their entire family. This was not a theoretical threat. The Germans enforced it with enough consistency that it became a genuine and constant calculation for everyone in Poland who was considering whether to act. The risk was not abstract. It was specific and documented and frequently demonstrated. Irena Sendler knew this. She knew it with the specific clarity of a person who had grown up watching her father, a doctor, treat patients regardless of their background, and who had been taught by his example that the identity of the person in front of you did not determine whether they deserved your care. She knew it, and she acted anyway. The operation she built was not improvised in the way that stories of individual heroism are sometimes romanticized. It was systematic. It was organized. It involved careful planning, reliable networks of people who could be trusted to maintain silence under pressure, and the management of enormous logistical complexity with the limited resources available to a small group of people operating in secret in an occupied city. Getting a child out of the ghetto required solving multiple problems simultaneously. There was the problem of physical extraction, which required either smuggling the child through one of the checkpoints using the social worker credentials and whatever concealment method was available, or using the network of underground passages and hidden routes through the wall that Sendler and her colleagues had identified and mapped. There was the problem of documentation, which required creating false identity papers for every child that were convincing enough to survive scrutiny from German officials and from Polish informers who were always a potential threat. There was the problem of placement, which required finding families and institutions willing to take children whose presence in their homes or facilities could cost them their lives. And there was the problem of the record, which required keeping track of where each child had been placed under what name without creating a document that, if discovered, would unravel the entire network. The methods of extraction were as varied as the circumstances required them to be. Infants were sometimes sedated and carried out in toolboxes, in potato sacks, in the bottom of carts, in whatever container could plausibly be explained at a checkpoint. Older children were sometimes dressed in the habits of nuns or in the clothing of Polish workers and walked out through checkpoints that relied on visual inspection rather than systematic documentation. Some children were taken through the basements of buildings that backed onto the ghetto wall or through the city's sewer system, which connected the inside of the ghetto to the outside in ways that the Germans had not fully secured. Some children were carried out in ambulances under the pretense of medical transfer, with the ambulance's German shepherd dog trained to bark loudly enough to cover the sounds a frightened child might make at the wrong moment. Every method was adapted to the specific child, the specific checkpoint, the specific day, and the specific level of scrutiny being applied at that moment. There was no single formula because the situation changed constantly, and the people who were caught trying to apply a formula were the ones who did not adapt. The placement network was built from relationships that Sendler had developed over years of social work, and that her colleagues in Żegota had cultivated through their own contacts. Polish families who agreed to take children were making a choice that could end in their own deaths, and many of them made it anyway, driven by a combination of moral conviction and basic human response to a child who needed a home. Convents and orphanages were approached through channels that allowed their leadership to make an informed decision about the risk they were accepting. Some declined. Others became central nodes in the placement network, taking multiple children and maintaining the cover stories required to explain their presence. The children themselves had to be prepared for what was being asked of them, which in the case of very young children was simply a matter of concealment and care, but in the case of older children required a conversation about identity that no child should ever have to have. You are not who you were. You have a new name. Do not speak the old one. Do not mention where you came from. Do not tell anyone what you remember. The lists that Sendler kept were the most dangerous object in the entire operation. They contained the real names, the false names, and the placement locations of every child who had been moved through the network. They were the only mechanism through which, after the war, the children could be reconnected with surviving family members or with the broader Jewish community that might know something of their origins. Without the lists, the children would simply become the people their false identities said they were, their actual histories erased as completely as the Germans had tried to erase everything else. Sendler understood that the lists had to be kept, and she understood that if the Germans found them, the entire network would be compromised. She wrote them on tissue paper, placed them in glass jars, and buried them in the garden of a colleague's house, knowing that if she was arrested, the jars would remain hidden and the record would survive even if she did not. In October 1943, the Gestapo arrested Irena Sendler. The arrest came through an informer, which was always the most direct route through which underground operations in occupied Warsaw were penetrated, and it resulted in her being taken to Pajak prison, which was the primary detention facility used by the Gestapo in Warsaw, and which had a reputation that its inmates understood clearly before they arrived. The interrogations that followed were not gentle. She was tortured, her feet and legs broken in the course of questioning that was designed to extract the names of her contacts and the locations of the children she had placed. She did not give them. She did not give names. She did not give locations. She did not. apparently, indicate in any way that would allow the Gestapo to begin unraveling the network she had built. The interrogations continued. The sentences handed down by the German authorities were not ambiguous. She was condemned to death. She did not die. Żegota, operating through the bribery channels that were one of the few tools available to underground organizations dealing with the German occupation, managed to secure her release by paying the German guards who were responsible for carrying out the execution. She was taken to the execution site and left there, officially listed in the German records as having been executed. She was alive, but she could not be alive publicly, which meant she spent the remainder of the occupation moving between safe houses, continuing her work under a false identity. Unable to return to her own name or her own home, her legs broken and badly healed, carrying the physical consequences of what had been done to her in Payak alongside the knowledge that the children were still out there and the lists were still buried in the garden and the network was still running without her direct. After the war ended, Sendler dug up the jars. The lists were intact. The tissue paper had survived. The names were legible. The work of reconnecting children with their families and their histories began immediately, though the scale of what had happened during the occupation made it one of the most heartbreaking administrative tasks imaginable. Most of the parents whose children had been taken out of the ghetto were dead. The roundups of 1942 and 1943 had reduced the ghetto population catastrophically, and the families that the children had been separated from had, in the overwhelming majority of cases, been consumed by the processes that the separation had been designed to protect the children from. The children were alive. Their parents were not. The lists that Sendler had maintained at such cost now served a different purpose than she had originally imagined. They were not a tool for reunion. They were a record, a proof that these children had existed, had been known, had been named, and had been protected by people who chose to act when acting was the most dangerous thing available to choose. Irena Sendler lived until 2008. She was 98 years old when she died, and the recognition she received in the final years of her life was substantial by the standards of how the world tends to treat people who did what she did. She was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. The nomination supported publicly and warmly by the children she had saved and by the descendants of those children who understood that whatever their lives had become, the fact that their lives had continued was directly attributable to one woman's decision to carry tissue paper lists and glass jars into one of the most dangerous situations in human history. The Nobel that year was awarded to Al Gore and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Sendler's response to the outcome was characteristically understated. She had not, she suggested, done what she did in expectation of recognition. She had done it because it needed to be done, and she was in a position to do it. The jar in the garden is the image that stays with you, not the medals, or the citations, or the honorary citizenships, or the statues, or the school named after her in Poland, or the organizations that carry her name into the work of Holocaust education in countries she never visited. The jar, the tissue paper, the tiny handwriting. The two lists inside a glass container buried in the dark on the chance that what was written on them might still matter to someone someday. That is the object that contains the whole story. The belief that the names of 2,500 children were worth the risk of keeping them, worth the broken legs and the condemned cell and the false identity and the years of hiding, worth all of it, because the children deserved to know who they were and where they came from, and that someone had known their names and written them down and refused to let them disappear. History does not always remember the people who did the most important things. It tends to remember the people who did the most visible things, the people who were in the right place when the cameras were present, the people whose actions fit neatly into the narratives that get taught in classrooms and repeated in textbooks. Irena Sendler did her most important work in darkness, in secrecy, in the specific invisibility that is required of people who are doing things that the people in power have decided are forbidden. She did it for years. She did it after they broke her legs. She did it after they listed her as dead. She did it until the war was over, and then she dug up the jars and started the work of making sure the record survived. 2,500 children, 2 lists, 1 jar, buried in the dark, and a woman who decided that some things were worth more than safety, and acted on that decision every single day until there was no longer a reason to.